Well, I'm Jenny Graham from the Tulsa World, and you are in. Is your name pronounced Tali Nates?
Absolutely. You
Okay.
are saying it as a pro.
Well, thank you for joining me. And you are the founder and executive director of the Johannesburg. Let me get this right. Uh, Tell me the official name of your museum.
So it is the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. We don't call ourselves a museum, even though we are in a way a museum, but also an educational center. So it's a hybrid place, of memory, education, and also other programs.
Okay. And you're going to be the featured speaker at the Tulsa Interfaith Holocaust Commemoration, sponsored by the Tulsa Council for Holocaust Education and the Tulsa City County Library on April 28th, 7 p.m. at the Congregational B'nai Emunah. And you have a fascinating, if tragic, family history. Would you mind telling me a little bit about your family?
Absolutely, Jeannie. First of all, it will be such an honor to be in Tulsa. It's my first visit in Oklahoma, actually, and of course, in the city of Tulsa. And I'm very honored to be invited to be there, and looking very much forward to meet so many people and learn a lot about the community. I am coming from a family, actually, of Holocaust survivors. So my mother was from a family of those that managed to get out. So her story is not as tragic because she, as a little girl, and her immediate family managed to get out from Poland in time. But sadly, my father's family did not. So his family, and he was only 14 years old at the time, his name, he passed away since, but his name was Moses Turner, or Marian Turner, that was his Polish name, had a brother, two sisters, parents, large family, of course, grandparents and uncles and cousins. They were also in Poland. He lost his father quite young, so his mother was a single mother looking after the 4 children. And then when the war started, they were caught in this tragic event of the Holocaust, separated. Each one of them had terrible experiences. My father survived 4 concentration camps. My uncle survived 5 concentration camps. My grandmother and the 2 aunts were murdered in the killing center or the death camps of Belzec. And actually, from the whole family, only the 2 brothers survived, and then discovered one distant cousin that also survived. However, they did survive because of the actions of Oskar Schindler. So that is something that I will speak about, and that is the fact that Oskar Schindler was, of course, a German, belonged to the Nazi party, yet decided to move from being a perpetrator that is using slave labor to rescuing over 1,000 men, women, and children were rescued by him, amongst them my father. And in a way, that is the reason I'm with you today, speaking to you today, because of the action of one man.
So did your father speak of his experiences? Because so often, for so long, Holocaust survivors didn't. I mean, their attitude toward it sometimes was, we've got to move on. How did you grow up? Did you grow up hearing the stories, or is it something you had to pull out of him a little later?
It's such a good question, and such an important question, because the trauma was on individual level, on family level, and of course, collective trauma on a community level. And with survivors of trauma, of the Holocaust, but also of modern genocides, I work a lot with the genocide from survivors from Rwanda, for example, from the genocide in Rwanda, and you see the same kind of patterns. So there were survivors that spoke and were telling their story, and there were those survivors that did not speak. In my family, it was interesting. My father, who was, as I said, only 14 years old when the war started, was a young teenager. Mm-hmm. And the trauma was so severe that he did not speak. He had nightmares, He spoke a little bit to my mother, but generally did not speak. However, my uncle, that was 4 years older than my father, was more mature, was 18 years old when the war started, was an adult during the war. He spoke. He processed the trauma through speaking. So he wrote his memoir, he was writing poetry, he was speaking. And because I was the child that was interested, I was the one that was the history buffin, which was so interested in asking the questions, he was telling me the stories. So I heard a lot of those histories and stories and testimonies actually from my uncle and not my father. Sadly, also my father died when I was young. I was a teenager. He had cancer, which he did not survive. And maybe if he lived longer, the time would have come that he would have shared the stories with me. But I'm so grateful to my uncle Henrik or Hanoch Turner, who spoke and spoke and spoke and spoke. And I do know the stories from him.
So your center, as you said, it's more than a museum. It's a place of discussion, reconciliation talks. It's a place of education. How long did it take you to get that center off the ground? I mean, I would imagine it's a personal project for you. And were there other such centers in South Africa? I mean, was this the first?
It's again a brilliant question, because really this project is a legacy project. So if you connect it to my family, it's for the survivors and for those that did not survive that the center was, of course, built. But it's also because of my work with genocide survivors from the Holocaust, but also from Rwanda, and because of the difficult history of South Africa, our own difficult history of apartheid, of racism, of crimes against humanity, that a center such as that should have been built. There are other centers in South Africa, and they are our sister centers. The first center actually was built in 1999 in Cape Town. It was a smaller Holocaust center, not a genocide center, but they enlarged their exhibition, and they also developed a little bit further, and they work very closely with us. Also, there is a small center in the city of Durban, which is called the Durban Holocaust Center, also enlarged their work and doing much more genocide work. So we work a lot together. We have a foundation together called the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation, which makes us strong. You know, we can work together, share information, share exhibitions, share speakers and resources. We're so far away in South Africa, at least we can work together and help each other. The center in Johannesburg that you see behind me, the picture of the center, is of course the largest in South Africa, and I would say the largest in Africa on issues of genocide, of course Holocaust as well as other genocides, because we look at Namibia, for example, or Rwanda, but it also is more than a museum, because it looks at connecting atrocities in other parts of the world to atrocities that are happening in our country in the past, but also issues of human rights abuses now. One that I will share with you which is very, very important, is the issue of refugees and the targeting of refugees, asylum seekers, stateless people that are coming to South Africa from war-torn countries, Somalia or the DRC or Rwanda, and are targeted because they are considered the other, the ones that are coming and maybe taking our jobs or maybe taking our homes or spaces. And there is a movement, I'm ashamed to say, in South Africa, to a xenophobic, Afrophobic movement that does even hurt, kill, burn, loot the properties and take the lives of such migrants, African migrants, to our country.
One of the things that Oklahoma has recently, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, our state, we recently passed a requirement for youth to take a Holocaust education. And this is a first, and it's a long time in coming. And since you work so much with Holocaust education, for people who are unfamiliar with what that looks like, for what that is, how would you describe the sort of important elements of a quality Holocaust education for youth?
It is absolutely amazing that Oklahoma took that decision. The history of the Holocaust is unprecedented. There are historical chapters and themes when you learn and study about the Holocaust that can not only teach you about history and the power of history, but also can make you connect to issues of human behavior, issues of choices under very difficult circumstances, issues around refugees, issues around identity, us versus them, and of course, issues of what happens when othering becomes a law, becomes a mechanism of a dictatorship, of a totalitarian state, becomes an issue of an ideology of hate, and a group of people or groups of people, in the case of the Holocaust, are targeted not for what they did, but just because they were born in a certain way. So the importance of the Holocaust as a case study, really, as an entry point to look at human behavior, as I said, is immensely important. The Holocaust can teach us about how a state can stop being democratic, the danger and the fragility of democracy. That's what happened to Weimar Germany. That's what happened when a dictatorship, of course, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, but he was not the only person, and we cannot just talk about one person. It was a whole system. Really takes a demolished democracy, takes laws, ideology, education, propaganda, and fear and terror, and terrorizes a people to target specific groups, amongst them the Jews, but of course also Roma and Sinti, people with disabilities, and so many targeted groups. And maybe finally, just to say that it many times starts with words, but it doesn't end with words. So of course, the saying of Heine, that where you burn books, you will burn people, is very, very important, because the issue is that the targeting started with words, but ended in the ovens of Auschwitz and in the camps and in the killing sites in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, and all around. And 6 million Jews were murdered in those 6 years.
It's interesting you bring these up, because while we're talking about youth in America, as I'm sure you have been following, there are huge divides. And we in Oklahoma, nationally, we're seeing bills that want to ban certain books. There is a big pushback to things like talking about race. You know, Tulsa, as you may or may not know, in 1921, there was a massacre in our city that eliminated an entire Black community. And every time we start writing about this, talking about this, there's pushback. And the pushback is essentially, why are you bringing up the past? Why are you stirring it up? And so a lot of times just talking about race, and that's the, maybe an American, maybe a South African issue as well, there's pushback to it. So how do you take what you do with Holocaust education and use that to make these discussions in other areas, I don't want to say a safe place, but a place where people can talk more freely instead of being either fearful of talking about it or just rejecting it? So how have you, because I'm sure South Africa maybe deals with, especially after the apartheid, some of the issues that we deal with America. So how have you seen, how effective have you been at connecting those issues?
So you use the word fear, and you use the word, the sentence, let's not talk about the past.
Right, that's what we hear.
Yeah, and every society, of course, has that. So if of course, I'm coming from South Africa, I can speak about the South African experience, and also with the Holocaust, I can reflect a little bit about, for example, Germany or Austria, and how did those societies handle the past, and it's never easy. The past is very painful, but in a way, if we do not in our society look at our past and all our past, also the very painful past, that we really don't want to go there because it's so painful and it's so scary, and you do not want to look at those terribly bleeding chapters in your history. The issue is that we, first of all, as many scholars said, tend to repeat it. That's the one thing. But the other thing is that we tend to, I can speak, and I'll give you an example from South Africa that is very, very clear. We tend to sort of just put a tablecloth over it and say, we do not want to speak about it. Let's not talk about it. But the pain is still there. Even if we put the tablecloth on it, even if it is a beautifully white iron tablecloth, the pain and the blood and the soreness is still there. It will not go away if we just close our eyes. So we can't behave in a way like a baby that a baby that is saying, I don't see, I can't see, I will not see, because the minute you take the hands off your eyes, you will see it will not go away. Let me give you an example of South Africa that I used many, many times. South Africa had a lot of chapters of painful past. Many times people think of, South Africa, only apartheid. No, there were chapters of colonialism. There were chapters even of genocide of indigenous people. And I'm talking hundreds of years ago. The San, the Khoi, that were the natural settlers of the territories, almost disappeared. They were almost killed off. We barely speak about it. It's not in the museums. It's not something that we are talking about. The other thing is, even during apartheid or before apartheid, some wars between different sides of the population, we don't want to speak about it. We're afraid to speak about it. And the problem is that we are doing something that you will not expect other societies to do. Let me give you an example. If we speak about colonialism, Germany controlled Namibia, next door to South Africa, on the coast, on the west side of South Africa. There's a country, independent country, of course, nowadays, that is called Namibia. It used to be a colony of Germany. It used to be called German Southwest Africa. And we know, because Germany just acknowledged it last year in 2021, that the German colonial powers committed genocide against the Herero and the Nama in 1904 to 1908. Germany now acknowledged it. Germany lost that territory in 1916, and South Africa controlled that territory from 1916 until 1990. That was during apartheid, before apartheid, during apartheid, until 1990. We do not speak about the atrocities that were done then. We just don't speak about it. And when someone asks about it, what a South African will say, well, it was apartheid regime, it wasn't me, it was, them, and we don't speak about it. It's the past, we leave, the past in the past. Jeannie, can you or the listeners imagine Germany today in 2022 saying, the Holocaust, 1939 to 1945, it wasn't really us, it was the Nazi regime. Let's just not talk about it because it was them, it wasn't us. We do have to speak about our history. Our history is, I believe, the South Africa. I believe also our history is the United States of America, which is your history as a country, but of course of ancestors and of people that I did not know, but it's still in my name in a way. So that's the way I see it. And just finally, what we do in the center is we make connections. We don't force the point, but we make connections. So the connections can be on, as I said, human behavior, about choices, for example. It can be connections of resistance in different continuous events, but we do not compare. So we tell you the stories as a connected stories, connect the dots, and invite you to make the connection for yourself from those histories through a facilitated discussion. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how we do things here.
Connection. Yeah, we hear that a lot. It wasn't me. I wasn't there in 1921. I wasn't there during the Trail of Tears when our Indigenous people were moved at gunpoint. So, that's an interesting point of how it's not you, but then how do we move forward? That yes. Our history doesn't have to define us, but we can certainly learn yes. and be better. One of the things that is kind of the obvious issue right now is what's going on in Ukraine. And when you see what's happening there, for people like you who've spent your life hearing these stories and working under the idea of let's not forget, let's never forget, and you see this playing out, what goes through your mind? What do you want to say or do when you see those images that are coming out of there and what Russia's doing?
First of all, it's so heartbreaking. I think our world in the last years is a heartbreaking world, with wars from Syria to Yemen to Myanmar to what is happening in many countries in Africa, and now Ukraine. The pandemic that also was so devastating for so many. So when you look at our world in the last years, for us that are trying to learn from the past and move on and learn positive lessons about behaving better, defending democracy, safeguarding democracy, warning about not sleepwalking through the assault on democracy. We have a whole podcast series about that. To really be active, to be activist. Of course, all that is happening, and now in the last 40 days or over 40 days in Ukraine is totally devastating. To also see the assault on history, the assault on what we thought was an acceptable history. But now, there is an assault on that history is also really devastating. I think for us as institutions that are learning from the past, the important thing is to learn not to be a bystander. You know that the bystander always helps the aggressor, always helps the perpetrator. By not speaking up, you always basically empower the aggressor. So I think for us, as not politicians, but as people on the ground, like you, like me, like our audience, like our readers, I think it's important to know. So read, listen, don't listen to fake news, verify your facts, know what you are reading, make sure that you are reading or watching or engaging with genuine facts and not propaganda. Propaganda always existed. It's not a new thing. Goebbels was the chief of propaganda during the Nazi time, so it shouldn't be a surprise that it exists today. It's nothing new. So first of all, know more, because I often quote Auschwitz survivor and writer, wonderful writer, Primo Levi. And Primo Levi, one of the things that he said, he said few things that are unbelievable. He said, it happened, therefore it can happen again. This is the core of what we have to say. It can happen and it can happen anyway. So don't be surprised that it's happening. It can happen and it can happen anyway. We had warning signs, many warning signs that this is on the cards. That's the one thing. But the other thing that he's saying about the bystander is, and I don't remember the exact quote, but the quote is saying basically, most Germans perhaps wanted not to know what is going on there. So if you want not to know, you will not know. And our, I think, role is to know, to ask the questions, to empower ourselves with the information and assist. So let's become activists or upstanders. Let's donate if you can, talk to your families and friends, support communities in need, whatever is the task for you, if it's Ukraine or Myanmar or the Uyghurs or whatever is your passion. But don't be a bystander, be active.
I like your point about propaganda, because in America, there's a real divide, and you have, what's being called news, fake news. And I think that there's a real misunderstanding of what is propaganda and what is news, or what is, analysis. And so we put a lot of emphasis on Holocaust education for youth, but I've been in favor of, can we get that for the adults? Because I feel like there have been a couple of generations that have missed the lessons from that World War II, post-World War II era, that, I'm glad that we have Holocaust education going on, but I hope that message gets out to their parents and, sometimes grandparents. So,
but that's the reason, I'll just say a sentence, that's the reason the Holocaust as a history it's an amazing entry point. It's amazing because it has all that you're talking about, including propaganda, and how do you spread disinformation? It's all there. And you can learn from that to a lot of other fields.
Well, the topic that you're going to be speaking on, the title is When Silence Led to the Persecution and Death of Millions. And you have a fascinating history, a fascinating journey with the center. What is your message going to be to Tulsa? I mean, what do you think that, what do you want people to sort of walk away from this commemoration event that you're speaking at?
So I'll not tell you everything.
Well, right, you got to leave a little.
Everyone to be surprised.
Yes, exactly. We want people to attend.
So I will just hint here and there. I will share some of my personal history in more detail. I'll connect it to the importance of remembrance and commemoration and memorialization on the one hand, and that I believe is important, and of course education. But I think my main message is the message of choices and the message of not choosing to be a perpetrator, of course, or collaborator in a way, or definitely not a bystander. But the message will be that silence is not an option. When you see something wrong, you do need to speak up. And we will speak about who spoke up and share some hopefully hopeful stories and stories that will inspire rather than traumatize or depress.
Well, I appreciate that you're coming here. I think there are a lot of parallels between the U.S. and South Africa, a lot of similar tragedies, things that we can learn from. So I'm excited to hear you speak, and I appreciate you giving me time today to give us a little preview of that and learn more about your center. So thank you. And we look forward to having you.
Thank you. I can't wait. I will see you in a few weeks' time.